Hello everyone and welcome to our free college financial planning webinar. My name is Ryan Urban. I'm owner and senior advisor with Alpha Financial based in Colorado Springs, and I appreciate your taking the time to attend this presentation. Alpha Financial is a full-service financial firm, and that includes financial and retirement planning and tax preparation, and complete college planning services. Of course, oftentimes we find that each one of these services can be an important part of the other services. And I'll tell you one other thing. In addition to being the owner of Alpha Financial, I'm also a dad of two grown daughters, and I know exactly where you are right now. This can be a very confusing, complicated, even intimidating process. And much of what we're going to discuss here will address the questions that my wife and I had as we were going through the same process that you're going through now. Some quick housekeeping before we begin. I'll let you know that everyone is on mute right now, so don't worry if you have a dog barking in the background. That'll be okay. Please turn off any distractions if possible, such as your cell phone. Of course, take notes if that helps, and I hope that you can take this time to really focus on the information and invest in yourself. And I'm confident that the information we're going to provide here will be helpful to you. Also, it's important to me that we provide quality information here. So if you have questions, I want to give you a full and accurate answer. And the best way we have found to do that is for you to just email me at rurban@alphafinancial123.com. It's on your screen, so that I can provide you with a complete answer that you'll also have in writing going forward. Also, tomorrow you'll be receiving an email from us that will include a link that will allow you to schedule a complimentary chat so that we can look at your specific situation in detail. And please remember that we can meet in person, we can meet online, or we can just start things off with a phone call. So you'll be receiving that email tomorrow. During that evaluation, our goal is to make sure that you're doing everything possible to help your student gain admission to the college that they're interested in, and that you're employing every strategy possible to minimize your out-of-pocket costs in that process. So let's get started. Our goal here is to walk you through the college planning process, and we want you to remember that while most of this material will apply to you, some parts of it may not. And again, we'll be able to focus in on your specific situation if we get together for a free evaluation. Now, as a parent, you're dealing with two sometimes conflicting challenges. First, you want your child to be able to attend a school that is right for them and one that they want to attend. And second, you need to create and implement a plan that will help you pay for it. Now, outside of raising your child to college age, college is going to be the most expensive thing you'll be doing for your child. Now, in addition to going over the process, we're also going to share some tips and tricks to keep your personal costs down, including some things that most colleges aren't going to just offer to tell you about. And one more thing, I'm going to be providing you with a great deal of information here, and I know that most, if not all of it, is going to be new to you. So when we get towards the end, I'll try to tie it all together for you so that you can give yourself a checklist to follow going forward. Our research of parents' biggest concerns throughout the years really hasn't changed much. It all boils down to 5 basic issues. First, parents and students are always concerned that they're missing deadlines, making mistakes on applications, filling out the wrong application, and just not having the time to get everything done in time. Second, they're worried that they'll do something that'll hurt their child's chances for getting into the right school. Third, they're worried that they'll do something that will cause them to not get the most financial aid possible. Fourth, they know it's smart to have a specific plan for paying for college, but they're just not trained in that kind of thing, and they know that they're probably missing out on some ideas and strategies. And fifth, I'll tell you, as a parent getting started in this process, the one thing that kept me up at night was not knowing what I didn't know. In other words, we assumed all along that there would just be some kind of program or system that we could just plug into and that it would take care of everything and we'd just be on our way. Well, that just isn't the case because everyone is so different. So you have to create and follow your own plan. Now, here are some typical timelines and deadlines that you need to be aware of in this process. Of course, through their junior year, a student needs to be concentrating on setting themselves up for college. So this will include a pre-college curriculum, such as AP courses that might translate into actual college credits. This is a very good time to make college visits so that the student is not rushed at the end of this process. You may be considering how far they are from home and the environment at and around the school. There are various ACT and SAT test preparation courses, and they want to take certain personal tests that will help them clarify their strengths and their temperament, such as career aptitude testing and interest and value assessments. Then they hit their senior year, and they need to be aware of the timeline here. Between July and October of their senior year is the time that they'll be submitting their college applications, and we'll be getting more into detail on that. But it's important to know that the application process is not exactly the same for each school. So you don't want to wait until the last minute to apply, and you may be completing a common application for multiple schools, or some may require their own individual application. Most of these applications will be due in October. Now, in general, acceptance letters will be received within about 8 to 10 weeks after you submit your application, give or take. Then in October, you'll be going online to complete and submit your FAFSA profile, and you're going to hear that term a lot here. FAFSA is the main application for aid, and it stands for Free Application for Federal Student Aid. You may also be completing the CSS profile, which is a slightly more detailed application that is typically used for private schools. Now, this is a very important moment in the process because in a week or two, you'll be receiving your SAR from FAFSA. This is your student aid report. Now, this report is going to include two main things. First will be a review of all the information you submitted when you completed the form online. And then second will be your calculated EFC. EFC. Now, if you're taking notes, I want you to circle the letters EFC. And you're going to hear that a lot in this presentation. That stands for Expected Family Contribution. In other words, this is the amount of money that you'll be expected to personally contribute to your students' college expenses. It's based on your particular family financial situation at the time. And I'll give you a little heads up here. Just as it's possible to plan ahead to lower your income taxes, it's possible to plan ahead to minimize your EFC, your expected family contribution. So your deadline is usually going to be in October. Then things are going to slow down a bit through the holiday season. And then between mid-January and the end of March, the final award letters will be mailed out by the colleges. The award letter is the official document from the school that's going to include a breakdown of all the costs you can expect and a breakdown of the various loans, grants, and scholarships that you are being offered. The next deadline will then be May 1st, and that's when your student has to have made their final decision and submitted their non-refundable deposit to the school to get the ball rolling. So May 1st is the college decision deadline. Then during the summer, of course, the student is getting themselves ready to begin school. And that's going to include doing their school orientations, setting up their class schedules, getting their living arrangements figured out and paid for. Now, here's where the money comes into play, because it will be early to mid-July when the bills start coming due. And those bills will show up in their student online portal, whichever school they're going to. And most likely, you'll be able to have your own access to that portal. And you'll be able to set up email alerts so that the school can fill your email box with gentle reminders that you owe them money. So that's a 20,000-foot overview of the process. But if that's all you know, you're going to miss out on a lot of financial opportunity. So just like a new car has a sticker price, a college will have a sticker price too. And just like you can get a better price for that car, you can plan ahead, use the right strategies, and you can find yourself paying less for that college education. So if you know what you're doing as you go through this process, there's a good chance you'll be one of those people who will get the same education from the same school, but for a lower total price. So it's important for you to understand that you can significantly overpay for college, simply because you don't know what all of your options are. Remember what I said before, not knowing what you don't know can end up costing you a lot of money. So what kind of money are we talking about? Well, depending on the school and the program, the total cost can be anywhere from $20,000 a year to $300,000 a year. On top of that, there's no guarantee that the student will make it through college in 4 years. Right now, the average time spent for an undergraduate degree is about 5.8 years. And let's not forget, that's per child, per student. You have to plan ahead for a child, but if you're looking at 2 or 3 or more children, the time to take a very careful look at this and to come up with a smart plan is right now. When you start looking at this kind of money, you realize that paying for college for 1 or more children can very well have a profound effect on your family's finances down the road, and that includes your retirement. Now, after your final student has graduated from college, you only have so many years left before retirement. So once again, if you go into this process without a smart plan, it can very well have long-term effects. So how is a family supposed to pay for college? Well, it's like I told you before, I had this weird notion that when the time came, everything would just magically work out and everything would make sense. Well, it's not quite that simple. In reality, there are 4 ways to pay for college. The first is through your existing assets. Remember I told you about your EFC, your expected family contribution per year. Depending on the school, that may be $10,000 or $20,000 or $50,000 per year. One strategy then is to structure your assets so that you can minimize your EFC. The second option will be through loans, and we'll get quite a bit more into that here in a few minutes. You do need to know, though, that loans are not automatically approved, and they do tend to add up pretty quickly year by year. The third option for paying for college will be scholarships and grants. Now, this was another misperception that we had before we began the process. Yes, there are scholarships, there are grants out there, but they only account for 2 or 3% of the cost of college. And that's only if you can get them. Remember, there's only so much grant and scholarship money out there. And even if your student has a high school record that they're deservedly proud of, the odds are probably not going to be in their favor for the most part. And while they are helpful, they're generally fairly small. So trying to win and cobble together, enough scholarships and grants to pay for college is really not a realistic plan. But it can be a piece. The fourth option will be to go to a less expensive school. And, we want to go through every other planning option before we go in that direction. Or the student may not be able to go to school at all, or they may have to work for a time and save up the money. Again, we'd certainly rather make sure that we've explored every option before doing that. So let's go through these options one at a time. Your first option will be your current savings and investments. Now, you may or may not have a couple of hundreds of thousands of bucks sitting in your checking account, just waiting to be spent. But regardless of what that figure is, remember that where your money is right now is going to have an effect on your EFC, your expected family contribution per year. You have to know what you're doing before you go through this process, because even $10,000 in your checking account or savings account could increase your EFC by somewhere between $560 and $2,000 per year per child. Another reason why you have to plan ahead, understand how your assets are structured, and then understand any tax implications as well. Let's look at student loans. Some families and students will choose to borrow the money, but let's stop there for a second, because you have to remember that borrowing money for college is like borrowing money for anything else. First of all, the student may not have their own credit history. So you know what that means. You may end up having to co-sign for them, and your name would be on that loan until they qualify financially to refinance it. So when's that going to happen? It's after they've gone through college, gotten a job, and built some credit. And if you have any kind of credit issues, well, that will mean higher interest rates or not qualifying at all. I'm not saying that you don't want to get loans. What I am saying is you don't want to overemphasize their importance. You want to try to minimize them. The student will have to pay that money back, as I say, so beginning when they graduate, and they're either looking for a job or just starting out. So, for example, then, if they graduate, it could be a year before they find a job. Well, they still have to be paying on those loans 6 months after they graduate. Let's say the student has just $75,000 in loans. Well, that can be $1,000 to $1,500 per month on top of their regular living expenses right when they're just starting off. But what most parents don't realize is that there are strategies for taking out college loans that give you much more control and flexibility than relying on the various lending institutions to send you up with a new loan every year for 4 or 5 years. And we can help you with those. If you're going to borrow money, would you rather have tax advantages or no tax advantages? Would you rather have a predictable fixed payment or an increasing payment? Would you rather have an interest-free loan or a high-interest loan? Would you rather have to go through the loan process every year or have a pool of money available to draw from? Well, these are all questions that we ask during this process, and there really are answers to those questions. So again, this is why planning ahead is so important. When it comes to these loans, you don't want to just wing it. What ends up happening is that these loans begin to pile up on each other, and at some point, they just become too much. Now, the third option for paying for college will be scholarships and grants. 3 good resources here are fastweb.com, myscholarly.com, and studentscholarshipsearch.com. Now, this was another misperception that we had before we began the process. Yes, there are scholarships and grants out there, but they only account for about 3% of the cost of college. And that's only if you can get them, as I said. But try those 3 sites, and you don't need to pay anyone to do this for you. In fact, it would be a very good project for your student to focus on. Have them help out in this process. They can set up alerts on fastweb.com to receive emails when an appropriate scholarship becomes available, and they can apply themselves. Just remember that many of these scholarships are relatively small, so even if they do win one, trying to cobble these together to pay for college is problematic. I mean, if you can get a few of them, by all means, they are going to help. But you cannot look at these things as either a guarantee or as a panacea. They're not going to fix all these issues. And finally, there's the options of either going to a less expensive school or not going at all. We just don't like those options. We don't agree with those options. One of the crazy things about this process is that it's possible to pay less for a more pricey private school than for a cheaper local school. And we're going to get more into that here in a couple of minutes. Okay, let's move to some important misconceptions that many people have about the college planning process. First, a lot of families assume that their income is going to be too high, so they won't bother applying for aid. Now, this will be true for some and in some cases, but there are still some families in the $200,000 to $300,000 income range that are getting money for college. The question is how their income and assets are positioned, which takes planning. So the reality is that you can make a good living but still take advantage of some money for college. Another misconception is that the student's grades are too low. Now, this can have an effect on merit-based aid, but at the federal loan level, the student's grades generally aren't going to come into play. There are also some state programs that are based upon need as well. So don't let that be a deal breaker during the planning process. Next, what if you own a home? Well, that's another thing that will depend on which school you're dealing with. Some schools won't even ask about the equity you have in your home, but some will. So the reality is, if you do the proper planning in advance, you can protect the equity you have in your home so that you don't have to worry about it counting against you. Another concern we hear is that college financial aid is only for special groups. That one just isn't true. Where that issue comes into play will be in the area of scholarships and grants. And if you may have already done this, when you go in and you look at these available scholarships and grants, I mean, it pretty much divides everybody into all kinds of different groups. And so once you identify those, then you can apply for them. Some people have been told that this is an easy process. Now, I don't know if you've done this before or if you know someone who has, but easy is not usually the first four-letter word that comes to mind to describe this process. This can be a complicated and draining process, and you quickly learn that it's best to have a plan in place as you go through the steps. And when it comes to the financial side and the money that you have to come up with, it's easy to either make mistakes or just not be aware of what's available to you. At some point, you'll either get an acceptance or rejection letter from a school and the financial offer, and you'll most likely figure you have to either take it or leave it. And this is where a lot of families waste thousands of dollars, and we'll get more into that in a few minutes too. Finally, many people believe that the folks at the school, either the high school or the college, are going to play a big role in shepherding them through the process. But remember, these are people who are dealing with hundreds of students and applicants at any given time. So the reality is that it's not they don't want to help, it's that their time and attention and resources are limited. And importantly, they're not just suited on the family financial planning side on this. They may or may not be able to help with answers and process, but they're not equipped to deal with your family situation on a big picture basis. A lot of this is financial, and you have to have someone there who understands this. Families will often think that they can bring their financial information to the financial aid office at the college and ask them, well, what can you do for my student? Well, frankly, that's like stuffing your statements and receipts into a shoebox and driving over to the IRS and asking them to do your taxes for you. It's not the responsibility of the office at the college to help you minimize your out-of-pocket expenses. Their goal is to find the students that they want and to give them the smallest financial incentive possible to go to their school. That's it. Next, let's look at understanding how to determine if you're eligible. Here's a very important and very simple formula to know. First, there's the cost of attendance at each individual school. Okay, that's the COA. This represents all the costs of that college, such as tuition, fees, supplies, room and board. Then you subtract your EFC, your expected family contribution. This is the number that has been calculated based on your family finances, your family size, demographics, taxes paid, all of your financial data. Subtracting your EFC from the school's cost of attendance gives you your expected need. This is the amount of money you're eligible for for each year. So if the cost of attendance for 1 year at a school is $30,000 and your EFC is $20,000, then you'll be eligible for a $10,000 aid per year. Well, let's look at the second variable, though, in that equation. Your expected family contribution. What if there were something you could do to reduce your EFC to $10,000 per year? Well, that would increase the amount of aid that you would get to $10,000 a year or $40,000 over the course of 4 years. So the place you want to focus on during the financial side of this process is making sure that your expected family contribution is as low as it can legally be for your specific financial situation. And again, this is a part of the college planning process that can save you significant money, and most people aren't even aware it exists. Now, we generally identify three types of families as we look at this process. Category 1 will be the families who have total financial need. They're going to qualify for some level of financial aid no matter where they go. The problem for them will be making sure that they're picking the right schools, because some schools will be willing to meet all of their financial need and others will not. Category 2 families, which are the majority of the families that we talk to, they're going to qualify for some aid at some schools and no aid at others. This will also depend on how the family's assets are positioned and the student's background. This can be a pretty wide range of aid, from nearly total aid to nearly no aid. Category 3 families generally make too much money and have too much in assets to qualify for need-based aid, but they still have to go through the same process to get access to other money that is out there. For Category 2 families and Category 3 families, though, there may be some tax credits and other tax advantages that could help them save quite a bit of money. So it's good to have a general idea of which category you belong to, because it can help you along in the process. So what is the real cost of college? Well, we do tax preparation and tax planning at Alpha Management, and I can tell you firsthand that a lot more goes into determining the real cost of college than just the top line numbers that you see. So let's look at the costs of different levels of schools and the kind of income you need after income tax to pay for them. Let's say your total income tax level between state and federal is 17%, and you want to send your child to a public school that costs $100,000 over 4 years. Well, you have to look at the after-tax numbers, because that's where you're going to have to work with. In order to pay for that college, you'll have to gross an additional $120,000 to pay for it. If you're sending them to a private school, that's an extra $240,000. For an elite school, that's an extra $280,000. Then imagine if you have more than one child. Now we're talking about several $100,000 that you'll need to account for. And obviously, if your income puts you in the higher tax brackets, that means you'll have to gross even more over the 4-year period for each child. And by the way, which direction do you think income taxes are heading over time? You're not alone if you think they're going up, so that will be a little more pressure to do the proper planning. Now, again, it's very important to look at the big picture as you're doing your college planning. The money that you're going to spend each year for each child is going to affect not just that child, but your whole family. And that includes what your retirement is going to look like down the road. One very important term used in personal finance is opportunity cost. This is an important phrase because it looks at money you may have made if you had invested those dollars in something other than where you did. So in this context, what are you missing out on financially when you spend money on your student's college? How is your retirement going to be affected by the dollars you're spending on college? Now, you can't feel guilty about asking yourself that question, because one day you're going to look back and wonder, did I do everything to make my retirement as comfortable as possible? So let's say that instead of spending your money on college, you could invest that money and earn, let's say, 6%. What would that money look like when it's time for you to retire? Well, I hope you're sitting down. Let's take a look at the numbers again based on the level of school you'd be paying for. So if you're just 15 years from retirement and you could invest the money you would have spent at a public school, you'd have an extra $240,000 available when you headed into retirement. If it had been a private school, that number would be closer to $500,000. And as we look over the rest of this chart, depending on how long you have before retirement and the kind of school we're looking at, we're talking about a great deal of money. And don't forget, this is per student. So what kind of money would that look like in your situation? So again, you can approach the college planning process by just taking things on as they come, or you can look at it from a planned out, big picture perspective, and it can help not only your kids, but your retirement. So let's take a look at the main financial sources of college financial aid and where does available money come from. In general, there is aid money available from 4 places: the federal government, state governments, the schools themselves, and from a wide variety of private sources. So let's look at each one of these. There are a few sources of college financial aid available from the federal government. First are Pell and SEOG grants. The Pell Grant is the main federal grant that most people know about, and the SEOG is the Supplemental Education Opportunity Fund grant that is kind of a sister grant. It's a smaller grant that is often given to people who qualify for the Pell Grant. Next are college work-study funds. Now, this gets interesting. There are two parts to these: gift aid help and self-help. The gift aid is the free money, which we like, and the self-help will be student loans and work-study. College work-study programs work like this. If your child gets a job off campus, let's say as a cashier, the money they make at that job is going to count against you when next year's expected family contribution is calculated. So if they get a job on campus under a work-study program, those dollars are exempt from your expected family contribution calculation. They still have to pay taxes like any other job, but remember, we're trying to keep your EFC as low as possible to keep your out-of-pocket expenses as low as possible. Another nice thing about work-study is that these jobs will usually be on campus, and if they're living on or near campus, they have fewer transportation issues to worry about. It also allows them to network with people around campus. Up next are student loans, and you're going to find that they come in two separate flavors: subsidized loans and unsubsidized loans. You'll see these terms both during the application process and on your final financial paperwork, so it's a good idea to have a basic grip on what they mean. You know, I talked earlier about being careful when we're taking out student loans, because just like any other loan, you have to apply. You may or may not qualify for them, and then the student has to pay them back with interest. And they're not paying back these over 100 years. There's a time frame involved. And as I mentioned before, a student with a typical loan obligation might be paying $1,000 or $1,500 a month on it right out of college. And remember, there is a good chance that a student is not going to qualify for larger loans because they don't have the income. They haven't built up enough credit, or both. So that's where parents come in, and they have to co-sign on the loan. Now, there are Stafford loans available to the students themselves, but those are limited to $5,500 for freshmen, $6,500 for sophomores, and $7,500 for juniors, seniors, and fifth-year students. Now, that sure helps, but in most cases, it won't get all of the job done. So the parent may very well need to get involved, and that's where Parent Plus loans come in. Now, understand, these are loans taken out directly and personally by the parent. So even if the child leaves school early, the parents are still on the hook for paying that loan back. Now, sometimes you'll see a college in its award letter to the student include a Parent Plus loan in the overall package. You've got to look at these award letters because there are several pieces to them, and they all add up to enough money to get the child into school. And this is the way they do it. They piece them together. These are typically 10-year loans for the parents, and the interest rate is locked. Just remember that you may end up with 4 separate Parent Plus loans, all at their own interest rate to pay off once they're taken out. So each one of these loans now becomes an additional monthly payment each year, and that's for each individual child. But it's good to be aware that these exist, and we want to just keep them to a minimum during the planning process. Next are the dollars that are available through the states. So depending on which state you're in, your planning process has to include chasing these down and making sure that if you apply, if it's appropriate for your student. Now, we're based in Colorado, and here there's a very good program called the COF. That's the College Opportunity Fund. It's available to most students, and in fact, we found that most colleges make them obvious to you during the application process. So there might be some kind of a link there that says, click here to apply for the COF. That's just a regular part of the planning process. Now, different states will have different programs. Some will involve loan forgiveness. Some will be restricted to certain demographics or financial need or certain college curriculums. Then we have aid programs available through the various colleges and universities. Now, these are directed with the school. Many of these schools have huge endowment funds, and that's where a majority of the money is going to come from. And this really is a crucial part of the planning process because remember, a school sticker price, the cost they tell you about up front is not necessarily what you would be paying. So understanding how this process really works can make a big difference in the school your child goes to and the money that is coming out of your pocket. So the federal government, the state government, grants, all that does matter. But it's these school endowments that can really make a difference in the long run because this is not money that you're borrowing and paying interest on. You need to know that a lot of these dollars are awarded on a first-come, first-served basis, and they'll often go to roughly the top 25% of applicants. So a lot of your college planning attention has to go in this direction. I get questions on, well, when should we begin this process? Well, it has to begin early. I mean, if you can start it in your freshman year, that's a great idea because you want your child's overall resume, and that'll be things like their grade point average, their out of extracurricular activities. You want that to look as good as you can because you're increasing your child's opportunities for getting some of those endowment dollars. So let's say you and your student may have a list of colleges you're interested in narrowing down to 2 or 3. Well, that's where you have to drill down and look at the bottom line, the figure that is sitting there after the college has made an award offer. Finally, there will be some money available through private sources. Now, we provided a few examples of websites you can apply, you can visit to apply for various smaller scholarships. There are a few banks that will offer student loans, and they're easy to find online. I don't want to mention their names, but they're not hard to find online. Just remember that most students will not qualify on their own, and the parent will probably need to co-sign these loans. And there are organizations like, for example, the Rotary, that will hand out awards of $250 to $1,000 to local students. You might even find out that a parent's employer offers scholarships to the student of their employees. And again, every bit definitely helps, and that's a good project to make sure your student is working on if they have the time. But I would recommend concentrating a lion's share of your attention on the bigger picture regarding college planning strategies. Okay, let's take a look at the form that's pretty much at the center of the process of finding financial aid, and that's the dreaded FAFSA form, which stands for the Free Application for Student Aid. This is a part of the process that is fairly complicated and can be a little overwhelming for some. But remember that one of the parents' biggest fears of this process is that they're going to make mistakes on forms, that they're going to miss deadlines because of those forms, and that these mistakes are going to cost their student or them during this process. Now, in all honesty, there is some truth to that. As I've said, this is a pretty unforgiving process, and when you make mistakes during this part of the process, it can and most likely will cost you. We're told that a fairly significant percentage of these forms are submitted with errors, with inconsistencies, omissions, where they just decided not to answer. You just can't do that. You have to be sure you're accurate and complete. These kinds of errors can literally get you bumped during the process, meaning you could lose your place in line or not even qualify to be considered. Now, the FAFSA is the main form that you'll be using, but there are also potentially others, depending on your situation. The CSS profile is one, and it's required by 350 to 400 schools, primarily private schools. This is not a free form. You have to pay for it, and every time you submit it to a school, you're paying for that as well. Much of the information is the same as the FAFSA form, but the CSS does get quite a bit more involved in your family finances, and it does include the equity that you have in your house. Also, you have to be absolutely certain, again, that the information you provide on both forms, the FAFSA and the CSS, is identical, or there's a good chance that this form will be delayed or rejected. Next are the forms and applications required by the individual schools. As we mentioned, these schools have endowments they use to help students with costs, and they'll all have their own set of standards and priorities. The same rule applies. Be sure that the information you're submitting is consistent across all of these forms. Then there are forms that may be needed depending on your situation. This would include forms for families who own businesses, family farms, families that have a divorce or a current separation. And you have to pay close attention to this when there is a divorce involved, if there is shared custody involved, because remember, the family's overall finances will count against them when it comes to their expected family contribution, their EFC. So this part of the planning process has to be handled very carefully. So which colleges give you the best shot at getting money? Well, we've covered quite a bit here, and I've mentioned that one of the most important phrases that you need to know is EFC. That's expected family contribution. This is the calculation that is made based on your family's specific finances. It tells you what these schools will expect you to contribute out of pocket for your student's college education. But it's important for you to understand that your EFC calculation can change. It can drop, it can go up, depending on how your family assets are structured. And again, that's part of the planning process. So now we'll look at another very important phrase that you'll need to know during this process, and that's percentage of needs met. Remember the equation we showed you before. The first number was cost of attendance. That's the cost it's going to take for that particular school to go to that school for that year. The second number is expected family contribution. That's your money. And the amount that remains is your need. Well, depending on a few variables, different schools will offer to fill that need at a certain percentage. And again, that percentage will depend on the school. And it's important for you to understand that this figure can be a great equalizer between schools. It may be that your student will qualify for a higher percentage of needs met at a school that costs more, meaning a school with a higher sticker price may actually cost you less than a cheaper school. So let's look at an example. Let's walk through how two colleges with different sticker prices can end up being backwards in terms of your out-of-pocket expenses. We'll say that Smith College is the fancy, expensive private college, and the Jones College is a regular public college. Well, the sticker price you're given when you contact each college is just under $66,000 a year for Smith and a little over $25,000 a year for Jones. You've calculated your EFC, your expected family contribution, is $7,878 per year based on your family finances. By subtracting your EFC from the sticker price of each college, you can see that your need for Smith College will be about $58,000 per year, and for Jones College, it's about $17,500. And that's when your heart sinks, because you and your student realize you're going to have to go with Jones College. But that isn't how it plays out. Remember that different schools will have different percentage of needs met standards. So it turns out in this case, based on the priorities and standards your student represents to the school, Smith College will meet 100% of your need figure, and Jones will only meet 55%. So that means that while Smith College is covering your needs, all of them, above your EFC, Jones is not. Remember that your EFC of $7,878 will still need to come from you. But adding the needs met amount and your EFC, you'll have the money for Smith College, the private school, but you'd still need an additional $8,000 of your own money, almost $16,000 per year to go to Jones, the public school. So once again, this is where careful planning and a full understanding of the process is so important. So percentage of need met is a very important figure to know before you apply to the college. You'll also want to know how much of that is going to be in the form of free money and how much of that will be in the form of self-help money. Remember that self-help money is student loans and work study, and you need to understand and track what each college is telling you. Now, it's going to be there on the form, the award form that they give you. It's going to be broken down dollar for dollar, so you'll be able to compare apples to apples, one school to the other. So let's say you've worked your way through the process and you've had some success, an award offer from a college. Well, is that the end of it? Do you have to take what they offer? Well, not necessarily. It's actually possible to get an increased award from a school. Now, we're not saying it's likely, but it has to be on the menu here as we plan this out. And in fact, it might be a good idea to audit any award offer you get just to be sure that it's the best you can do. As it turns out, sometimes a school will make a mistake on your award calculation. So knowing how to approach and negotiate with a school is a handy tool to have. There's also a fairly sneaky strategy called financial aid leveraging, and it can make a difference if you know how to communicate and negotiate with these schools. Financial aid leveraging involves contacting the school after they have made their offer and telling them, and you've got to be truthful, of course, that another school has made a better offer. And you ask them to review and confirm their offer. It's not like you're hanging, your child's education costs over their heads, but you can, civilly and nicely say, can you review and confirm your offer? And there are letters that can be used fairly effectively to do this. Roughly 65% of private schools and about 27% of public schools report that they are open to reconsidering their award offer depending on the student and the situation. And this is another example of how important it is you remain organized as you go through this planning process. So in this case, an award letter simply needs to be audited, meaning that you need to go through all the numbers and confirm that the final award offer is correct. And just remember that any given school is trying to maximize its revenues and has to make financial and value judgments along the way. Let's take a look at one of the best known and primary funding mechanisms for college that includes tax advantages, and that's the College 529 plan. There are also other plans known as Coverdales, which are similar, but in general, 529 plans are what are thought about most often. So let's look at this overview of 529 plans. 529 plans are specific IRS-regulated college savings and investment plans. The reason parents will open a 529 plan instead of a savings account or a regular investment account will be the tax advantages that are built into the plans, and we'll get into that. Because they are IRS-regulated plans, they will come with maximum contributions, currently $14,000 per year, or you can start a plan with $70,000 and then not contribute for at least 5 years. Generally speaking, the contributed dollars are invested in traditional securities like mutual funds and stocks and bonds. Because you're investing in the market, these plans will be subject to stock market risk. So just as we do with clients who are nearing retirement, these plans are structured so that the closer the student gets to college, the less risk and volatility will be built into their plan. We don't want a market crash to deplete the account right before the student needs the money for school. Now, here's the primary benefit of 529 plans. These dollars grow tax-deferred, meaning you're not paying taxes every year on the growth in the account, and they come out tax-free for qualified expenses like tuition, books, fees, room and board. Depending on the 529 plan that you use, parents may be able to deduct their contributions from their state taxes. The various states all have mutual fund company sponsors for their 529 plans, but all plans will cover all qualifying accredited colleges, regardless of the state they're in. So, for example, a 529 plan with a sponsor in Virginia will cover a student in Colorado. Now, as with any savings or investment strategy, you're going to have strengths and weaknesses that are inherent in these plans. The strength of 529 plans include the following. First, you get tax-deferred growth. Now, tax-deferred is a phrase that you probably hear so often, it may not really strike a chord. But again, if you're not having to pay taxes every year on the growth of your account, your actual realized net return in that account is going to be higher. Because you're investing in the stock market, you have the potential for strong market-based growth in that account. Then, after these funds have grown tax-deferred, you can take them, you can withdraw them tax-free for qualified college expenses. So minimizing your tax load is the main draw for these plans. And finally, 529 plans have a much higher maximum contribution than Coverdale plans, which can come in handy if a parent or a loved one wants to contribute to the plan. And of course, there will be some weaknesses to these plans, so let's cover them. Any funds that are withdrawn from a 529 plan that are not used for qualified college expenses will be subject to the same penalties as early withdrawals from 401ks or IRAs, and that's a 10% IRS penalty and taxes on the growth of those dollars. Because you're probably investing in the stock market, they are fully subject to stock market risk. So as I've mentioned before, how the dollars are allocated will be very important. Now, here's another example of how carefully planning ahead is very critical. Another weakness of the 529 plans is that all funds in the account will count fully against the student for financial aid as a family asset. Now, we typically go over options with families in this area because we're trying to position your assets, and those include 529 plans, in such a way as to minimize your expected family contribution. And finally, the child may not go to college, and if those funds are not spent correctly, you'll have the penalties that we discussed before. Now, when we began this presentation, I promised you that I would tie this information together for you so that you could have a list of things you need to know as you go through the process. So we just have two more quick things to do. First, here are the highlights of what we've covered for you to keep in mind at all times as you go through this. You have to know your deadlines. For example, you're applying for college admissions from July through October. You're submitting your FAFSA form in October. You should be getting your award letters in February and March, and your college decision deadline is May 1st. You have to understand that your EFC, your expected family contribution, is key to this process. So executing a strategy to minimize your EFC is going to be important. You have to understand that different colleges will offer to pay for a different percentage of your student's need. So even if one college has a higher sticker price than another, that doesn't necessarily mean that your out-of-pocket costs would be higher there. You have to understand how your personal financial and tax planning can play a very large role in how much money you're putting into this process. You have to understand that different forms of aid, such as federal aid, state aid, college work study, student loans, and even parent loans, are all involved in this process. You have to understand that various forms you'll need to have to fill out, such as FAFSA and the CSS, and you need to keep records so that all of these forms are filled out consistently. You need to be prepared to challenge awards offered by schools and how to leverage offers from one school to the next to maximize your final awards. You need to understand how different financial vehicles, such as 529 plans, can work for and against your expected family contribution. Now, if you decide that you're going to have someone help you with this process, there are a few questions that you may want to ask. Can you show me how to lower my EFC, my expected family contribution? Can you actually help me do that? Can you help me pick the schools that will give me the best aid package? Can you provide guidance when I fill out the FAFSA and CSS profile forms? Will you provide guidance on how to negotiate if I get a bad offer? Can you show me how to pay if I don't qualify for enough aid? Can you make sure and help me make sure that my tax bite is as low as possible through this process? And can you help me plan ahead to minimize the effect that this is going to have on my retirement? And if you'd like to discuss how we can help you through this process, we're happy to meet either in person, online, or we can just start things off with a phone call. As you can probably tell, the college planning process involves a few different elements. And Alpha Management is a big picture firm, so we handle tax preparation and planning, retirement planning, growth strategies, and asset protection. My contact information is there. Our phone number is 719-358-7116. Tomorrow, you'll be receiving an email from us that will include a link that you can follow to schedule a complimentary chat so that we can look at your specific situation in detail. Please remember that we can meet in person, online, or just by phone. So you'll be receiving that email tomorrow. Thank you very, very much for joining us, and I look forward to hearing from you.